Let's have an interesting conversation now. Let's go to Representative Khanna. He joins us. Representative Khanna, you supported Kamala Harris right out of the gate after Joe Biden stepped down. And it looks like she, according to the Associated Press, has enough delegates now that she will be the nominee. But I thought it was a bit quick to go with Kamala Harris right out of the gate. I was hoping for a fuller conversation with different candidates. Why the rush to Kamala Harris?
Well, I think she gets to run on the progressive agenda that Biden has recently been adopting. The rent caps that we've pushed hard for, which he spoke about in Detroit, the sense of strengthening Social Security, the investments in infrastructure, in clean energy. And I thought that I've worked with her, and there are a lot of things on the domestic front that I agree with. And I think she also would energize the base. But I also said from the beginning that I respected there being an open process, and I would hope that other candidates, if they wanted to run, would run, and certainly don't think it should be a closed process.
So Jimmy DeLine is one of our members, and he wrote in. He said, "Look, she's got a pretty progressive platform back in 2020: Medicare for all, higher minimum wage, money out of politics, etc." But that was a long time ago, Congressman. Do you think she'll stick with those policies? For example, Medicare for all, or is she going to go in a new direction now that's a little bit less progressive?
Well, part of my memory, because I was Bernie Sanders' co-chair, is she wasn't clearly for Medicare for all. She had the worst of all worlds, because the conservatives, moderates said, oh, she's for Medicare for all, but then she did all these plans. I don't even remember the details, where it was basically a version of Buttigieg's, some version of Medicare, but not the Medicare for all that Warren and Bernie ran on. So I hope she's for Medicare for all. I'm not sure she will be on that, candidly, but there are other areas on rent caps, on affordable housing, on a bold climate vision, where I do hope that she will take the progressive direction, and expect she will, because Biden himself was moving in a more progressive direction. It's one of the reasons that Bernie and I and AOC and others stuck with Biden as long as we did.
Yeah, well, but then I do have to ask about that. Now, given that Biden did drop out, do you regret was sticking with Biden for so long when it looked like he really didn't have a chance of winning?
Well, we thought that if he ran on a bold working class agenda that he could win. I mean, that was the conversation among a lot of people in the Congressional Progressive Caucus and Bernie Sanders. And you know what? He was adopting a lot of the things we were telling him to. He was running on Supreme Court justices. He was going to come out for term limits. He had adopted rent cap. I mean, rent control. Imagine how bold that is for Biden to have gotten there. He was running on strengthening, increasing Social Security, on a living wage. And our view of the election was that if we proposed a bold working class agenda, that he would be able to win. Now, I understand that there are people who thought otherwise, and obviously, in some sense, they turned out to be right, that he didn't think he could make the race, but that's where some of us were coming from.
Thank you. On those of us who thought he couldn't make it, but I hear what you're saying, and you guys were heading in that direction, which leads me to, well, okay, where are we now with Kamala Harris? Because at this point, now that she's the leader of the Democratic Party and she looks like she's going to be the nominee, there's going to be jockeying for a couple of things. For example, the VP spot. We'll come back to that in a second, but there's also jockeying for policy positions. So you guys had pushed the ball forward a little bit with Biden, and those things you mentioned are true, although he could barely say them out loud, in my opinion. So now, do you think Kamala Harris is going to pick up that ball and keep going in that progressive direction? Because there's going to be a lot of other forces, moderates, conservatives, telling her, don't do that.
Well, that's the big question. But she's had a conversation with Pramila Jayapal. My understanding is with Bernie Sanders. I personally haven't spoken to her yet, though I expect to over the next few days. Obviously, she's been busy, and that's going to be my conversation with her. I mean, I don't have any recommendation on who she should pick for VP, but I do have recommendations on what she should run on. And I would say you got to run on the rent caps. You've got to run on strengthening Social Security and Medicare. You've got to run on saying you shouldn't have to work in America and be poor at the same time, and we're going to increase living wage. And I would say to her, if you want any shot of getting the working class and some of the Scranton Joe working class that we're going to have to to win, the best way to do it is on a working class, middle class, economic, populist agenda, and that you are helping reinvigorate the energy, the donors, the enthusiasm, but ultimately to win these swing states, we're going to need that. And then I would also advise her on Gaza to make some dramatic moves that signal that it's not going to be a continuation of the Biden policy of basically a bear hug of Netanyahu.
So really interesting on all those fronts. Let me ask you about 3 specific policies. I could ask about hundreds, but just as a kind of a sense of where things stand. First on housing, private equity is buying up a lot of the houses in this country, and that's actually driving up the price of buying a house dramatically. Is there any discussion within the Democratic Party of stopping private equity from being able to do that?
Cenk, I don't know if that's a softball, but that's my bill in Congress. I mean, the Corporate Landlord Act that I introduced 2 years ago to stop private equity from buying single family homes, to say that we should not be having any federal subsidies to have one of these private equity companies go into Las Vegas, go into Phoenix and buy up homes under $500,000. I often say we didn't fight a revolution in this country to be serfs to Wall Street. And so, I wish that Vice President Harris will adopt that and run on that. She doesn't have to credit the bill I introduced, but I think that'd be a great issue.
Yeah, well, I give you plenty of hardballs, so one softball every once in a while is not so bad. But in all seriousness, the reason I ask that is because I want to see, does that have a prayer? Because that could endanger some donor money, so it's going to be a problem, right? But that would be incredibly popular. And so I wonder, is there, I guess what I'm asking is there enough movement within the Democratic Party for that to not be a minority position within the party?
I think so. Look, the Vice President Harris is going to have a choice to make, and she's going to have those people whispering in her ear that her life story, which is very inspiring, her being a product of the American dream, her being a generational change, and her standing up for reproductive rights and painting Trump as doing Project 2025 is going to be enough to win the election. That is what she should focus on. Hammer abortion rights, hammer that Project 2025 is awful, which it is. Talk about her being the embodiment of the American dream, which she is. Her story is incredible, and let's run on that. And then there are going to be the progressives like me who say, no, that's not going to be enough to win this election. It's not going to be enough to convince the 50-year-old in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, or in Downriver, Michigan, that we need their vote or deserve their vote over Donald Trump, who's survived assassination, and for better or worse, his favorability numbers have gone up after that. And that's just a fact. That we have to have something concrete to offer them. And you got to run on an economic populist issue and agenda. And that's really, over the next couple of weeks, I think more than who she's going to pick as vice president is what kind of campaign is she going to run between those two choices. That's exactly what I'm trying to suss out here. Is $15 minimum wage dead, or is she ever going to come back and talk about that? I think she will definitely talk about that. Even Biden talked about that. But look, some of the folks who stuck with Biden, and I know there was a lot of the commentators on our progressive, our friends, didn't like it. We were sticking with it because we really were seeing him move, not on domestic foreign policy as much, but on domestic policy, to adopt a lot of what Bernie Sanders was campaigning on. That's my hope is, and expectation is, that Kamala Harris will continue in the direction Biden was going. And I don't know what you think, Jake, but I think she should run as an underdog. Not to. I think she may have a better chance than Biden because of the dynamics of that debate. But it would be a mistake for her to think that, okay, we're in the lead. We've raised $100 million, and I don't have to have a tough, bold economic agenda to win this race. No, you're 100% right about that. I think she should go on the offense and stay there. And I don't think Biden moved nearly enough. We might disagree about that in terms of these economic issues, including $15 minimum wage. I think he barely did anything about it. But if she actually picks up that mantle, even if it's not true, just like with Biden, it's at least politically smart and strategic. I wish to God that it was true, right? But
Higher wages, doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that that's a good policy plank, but for a lot of Democrats, that's a bar too high. I'm just being honest with you, as you know. But that leads perfectly to the last policy question, which is paid family leave. You and I have talked about this before. It polls at 84%, 74% among Republicans. It's the biggest no-brainer in American politics. And yet absolutely nobody fights for it. It's just the craziest thing I've ever seen. So can we somehow get it to the Kamala Harris team? Please, just take the win. Take the win, do paid family leave.
I love it. And I think it goes right to the J.D. Vance argument. I mean, we don't just say paid family leave. We say you can't be pro-family in this country and then expect people to work and not see their families. No American should have to work so much that if their kid is sick or if their parent needs them, that they aren't able to get off from work. No person should have to work so much that they are working and still are poor. And that's why under Democrats, we're gonna raise the minimum wage to a living wage so you don't have to work and still be poor. And we're gonna have paid family leave so you don't have to work when your kid is sick or your elderly parent needs you. I think that is such a common sense message. Like, I don't think that's easier to explain than Medicare for all, which I support. It's easier to explain than a wealth tax. It's so common sense. With the kids I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris should lead with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Finally, the VP question. Is there a prayer of getting someone at least progressive adjacent as a VP? Maybe.
Who would that be? I mean, who do you think that is? And then I can tell you.
So I have you in the progressive camp, not the progressive adjacent camp.
Well, it's got to be someone, I mean, in the Midwest or one of those swing states. So,
well,
I mean, or unless you have someone out of the box.
Yeah, my thought is out of the box. The person who is both progressive adjacent and all of mainstream Democrats are comfortable with, who's literally prosecuted a case against Donald Trump, and one of the brightest guys in the Democratic Party, Jamie Raskin. Unify a lot of Democrats in that direction.
I think Jamie would be a fantastic pick. I think Jamie, I mean, I love Jamie Raskin. I think that he would be terrific. That's the kind of, also give moral direction to the campaign. I mean, that would be a thematic choice, a choice about where we want to go as a nation, more than, okay, I'm going to do the traditional balancing at the ticket and pick Roy Cooper. I'm not saying that that's a wrong pick, but that I love Jamie Raskin and he'd have my support. But we'll see what Kamala Harris does. But it's I'm biased. He's one of my closest friends in Congress.
That speaks well of both of you. Okay, clear. Representative Khanna, really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.